I do think that he's going to reassure financial markets that we have a strong and sound monetary policy team and that they'll step in if necessary. I think that's exactly what he needs to do. You've got Powell is in a difficult position because he needs to calm the markets down. And he also needs to make sure that he doesn't put the Fed at any kind of risk from retribution from President Trump. And so, he's been a master at choosing his words carefully, and that's what I'm expecting to hear out of this speech.
Well, yeah, we've certainly seen example after example of him having to dodge politically oriented questions at various news conferences and events, Betsy. But the thing that often the people asking those questions are really trying to get at is an understanding of the Fed's willingness to intervene, not just in any financial market like plumbing disruptions that we see, but actually economic disruptions we see as a result of tariffs. His message consistently is there's not a clarity on that tariff policy. Therefore, we don't have the certainty to kind of forecast any move. But I wonder if that means that inherently the Fed's going to end up acting too late, if they have to wait for the actual data to be in hand before doing anything, knowing monetary policy operates with a lag anyway. Do you think they could end up showing up too late to the ballgame?
Well, it's not just waiting for data. They're actually waiting for information. None of us really know exactly what's going to happen, how long these tariffs are going to last. When it comes to, an economic slowdown that is driven by tariffs, the Fed's in a difficult position because you're going to get a jump up in prices. So the price level will increase and we'll see the economy slow down. I think if you look at what the Fed was thinking back when we had tariffs in the first Trump administration, their focus is on the real economy. How much does the economy slow down? And really letting the price level jump up, because it's not ongoing inflation that comes with tariffs. It is a one-time increase in prices. Now, the problem the Fed has this time is that if people see that jump up in prices and they start to become fearful that inflation is taking off and they start engaging in activities that cause ongoing inflation. So they're going to be looking at what's happening to inflation expectations. Do we all sort of understand that the tariffs are pushing prices up and things are expensive and that's painful, but they're not going to keep going up? Or do we start to behave in a way that shows that our inflation expectations have become unanchored? I think what they need to do is focus on the real economy, that is where I think that they've indicated their focus currently is.
Well, and to that point on the real economy and also the expectations of consumers, Betsy, it does seem that the expectation tariffs were going to kick in and raise prices on things like cars was the driving force behind the March retail sales data we got today. Biggest jump in 2 years. In large part, you look at autos for that, purchases of other goods like electronics. What is that kind of front-loading signal, though, about what kind of consumer activity we're going to see later on in the year? If they decided to make those big purchases now to get ahead of tariffs, does that mean we're going to see a big drop-off in consumer spending in short order?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's such a great question. And it's always surprising to me how many business owners just are like, wow, this is great. We got this big bump up in sales. This is going to be going on forever. It's not. It's actually pulling sales forward, which is great because sales today are always better than sales in the future. But at the same time, you need to plan for the fact that you just pulled some of your future sales forward. So you're going to have to work that much harder to continue to get sales going forward. And what that basically means is even if the tariffs went away tomorrow, we would expect to see a slowdown, right? So Trump could stand up tomorrow and say, you know what, I'm done with all this. I got what I wanted out of people. We've negotiated. Let's go back to 2024 tariffs. I'm done with the 10%. I'm done with Canada and Mexico. We'd still probably see a slowdown because we've had so many purchases pulled forward. I think the real challenge is we saw purchases pulled forward because people do expect prices to jump up. And then we're going to see, sort of a exaggerated or magnified slowdown that comes because people tried to get ahead of those price increases.
Well, and just how easily will that slowdown in kind of consumer activity that is driving money toward businesses translate into those businesses not hiring as much or even laying people off, and actual changes in the labor market, which I think what you were alluding to, Betsey, when we're talking about the real economy and the Fed's dual mandate specifically is something that they would have to respond to or at least think about.
Yeah, so when I'm talking about the real economy, I am talking about, like, what do we produce? How many people are working? Are we using all of our equipment? Are we being as productive as we can? That's all real stuff. Nominal stuffs are the prices. And of course, the Fed wants to make sure that we don't have the nominal stuff, the prices going up too much, because that can cause us to make different decisions in the real world, like hire fewer people because we don't know what's going on. Look, I think companies are already at a place where they're being really cautious in terms of thinking about expansion plans, investment, hiring, because there's so much uncertainty. Operating in this highly uncertain environment means go slow. So it's a big, yellow light for people. If we see that, that we see the economy slow a lot, we see prices jumping up a lot, consumers pulling back, we're going to see that slowdown happen even further. But, one of the things you pointed out that, what should companies do? The challenge for companies at a time of high government uncertainty and high macroeconomic uncertainty is, if you're a business, you're trying to figure out, am I selling more or less because I got better or worse at competing with my competitors, because consumers are changing how they value my product relative to other products they can buy? Or is this the macroeconomy? Sorting through those three things is really tricky. It's a lot easier if the macroeconomy is stable and you just get to figure out, am I offering what consumers want, and am I doing it competitively against my competitors? That's where most businesses want to be. They want to be focused on that part of their business, not navigating tumultuous macroeconomic conditions.
I just want to note for our audience on Bloomberg TV and on radio and on YouTube, you can see as well that this event at the Economic Club of Chicago is just beginning. No eyes yet on Chairman Powell or the Chicago Fed President Austin Goolsbee, who is set to introduce him. But we have just gotten some embargoed headlines from the remarks that Chairman Powell intends to deliver, including as follows. Powell saying that the Fed is well positioned to wait for more clarity for the time being. In keeping with lines we've heard from him before, he says they can't have a strong labor market without price stability, which speaks to something else Powell is planning to say, that they may find themselves in a scenario with their mandates in tension. What we've just been discussing with Betsey, the labor market considerations and the inflation considerations. We're seeing Chicago Fed President Austin Goolsbee making his remarks now. We expect to hear from Powell any minute now. Betsey, before we do, just quickly on this, being well positioned to wait, how long realistically do you expect we'll be waiting until we get the Fed's next rate cut or rate decision? Because I guess we can't always rule out a hike either.
I think the issue is that these goals are in tension right now. One goal says cut, the other one says raise. And as long as they're in tension, they're going to wait, because waiting's the right thing to do if they've got equal forces pushing them in opposite conditions. And so I think we could see waiting continue for quite some time until it's clear that one of those is becoming a bigger problem.
Well, I guess it's a question of when that clarity actually will emerge. Do you expect, though, Betsey, that we could see a situation in which so long the clarity has been awaited for so long that when we do ultimately get a rate cut again, it's an emergency one, that they actually have to potentially act intermeeting? Because that was the kind of narrative that was bubbling up to the surface with the volatility of the last week or so.
I think the great thing is, if they need to do that, they can do that. But realize that cutting too soon risks ongoing inflation, which creates its own set of problems for employment, which is exactly the quote you read from Powell. When he says that we're trying to balance these two risks, it's not like I'm going to sacrifice one baby to help the other. It's that these two things actually work together. Price stability helps support maximum employment. And so, I do think that right now we're in a world where they are well positioned to wait. these things are in tension with each other. And we are very lucky to have a very thoughtful, well-informed Federal Reserve that is thinking through all of the data points and will act as quickly as they need to.
Well, and will they be able to continue to act with the independence that they need to, Betsey, given the rhetoric we've already heard from President Trump, who already thought weeks ago it would be a good time to cut rates?
Well, I think that threatening the independence of the Fed is about the worst thing you could do for macroeconomic stability. If you think we saw chaos with tariffs, I think Trump taking over the Fed is a level of macroeconomic chaos the United States has never seen.